I wanted to talk about moving your funds from an exchange to cold storage. This is important to do to protect yourself from exchange hacks or exchanges going down, going out of business. You might have heard of like FTX going down or Mt. Gox. And so the risk there is that you keep all your Bitcoin on an exchange and then something happens with that exchange and they take your Bitcoin, you can't get it back, or maybe it takes years to recover. And even after a few years, maybe you don't get the full amount of Bitcoin. So I was interested to see what ChatGPT would tell me are the 10 most important things, and then I can run it by my own knowledge base and kind of critique it. I assume what ChatGPT is going to give me would be like kind of mainstream information that's out there, since ChatGPT scrapes the internet. And then I've spent ungodly amount of hours studying Bitcoin, so I can kind of comment on it. So let's see what ChatGPT has to say, and I'll stop it after the first one.
Here are key things to know before moving Bitcoin to cold storage. Control your private keys. Cold storage means you control the private keys. No third party can access your funds.
So that's absolutely true. A lot of people might jump to cold storage before they're really ready, though, and they can risk losing their funds there by messing something up. I studied for hours and hours and moved my funds, and I still made some small mistakes. Luckily, they didn't cost me my funds, but my UTXO management was bad, and that's one thing I want to talk about is UTXO management. But I think that for the first point there, I think that's pretty on point. So let's go to the second one.
Use a trusted wallet. Choose a reputable hardware wallet, e.g., Ledger, Trezor, or a secure air-gapped method for paper wallets.
So there I have some debate. I don't think that's completely accurate. I think Trezor's probably all right. I would not get a Ledger. I don't trust that company. For various reasons, you can look into that, but so I would stay away from Ledger. Trezor is probably all right. I wouldn't use a paper wallet for a variety of reasons, especially if you're new. So for hardware wallets, the ones I could recommend is if you're new to Bitcoin, not very tech savvy, you could look at a Bitkey. Bitkey might actually speed up the rate that you would be comfortable taking your keys off exchanges. It's really built to be a seamless experience and really easy, especially for non-tech users. It also has an inheritance feature, and so if you're worried about dying and then no one being able to access the Bitcoin that you have, this has a built-in inheritance feature. I think you have to buy 2 of these for the inheritance feature to work, though, so it can get a little bit pricey. The cost on this is a little cheaper if you go to like Amazon or Best Buy. Maybe it's not the best idea to buy from these dedicated retailers, but it's an option. Other options you can get for good hardware wallets could include like the Blockstream Jade or anything from CoinKite. They have their Cold Card series of wallets. So let's dive back in here.
Back up your seed phrase, write down and securely stow. Your recovery phrase, usually 12 to 24 words. Never store it digitally. Test with smaller.
So that's dead on. So when you take your coins off an exchange and save them to a device, like one of the devices that I just talked about, the device will have you back up that device by writing down a series of words, either 12 or 24 words. The Bitkey doesn't do that, but the other ones will. Most of the hardware wallets, basically all of them, will have you do this. And what you do is you write down your recovery phrase, 12 or 24 words, and then you store that securely. A lot of people will stamp that into metal and then put it in a few spots so that if your house burns down, it can be recovered. You can go down a rabbit hole on this. There's a lot of ways to do it, but securely storing that backup is very important, because if you lose your device or your hardware wallet is stolen or lost, then your funds are gone. So you back up. You take your coins off an exchange, put them on a hardware wallet, and then if it's a feature of that hardware wallet, you write down your recovery words in a secure manner. So again, putting them into metal. And you can do that at very low cost. So you could buy some washers from the hardware store, buy a kit of metal stamps off Amazon for like $10, $20, and then do it yourself and save those in some secret spots. Or you could look at a different type of backup method. There are a lot of different ones. There's one called SuperBacked, or Bitcoin itself natively supports multisig, which allows you to split your backup into, like, say, 3 different parts, and then you could distribute those parts. And so you'd have one part with you, say, one part with a family member, and then another part hidden somewhere. And so that way, if you lose one of those parts, you can still get your funds back by getting the other parts. And so you can get like a 2 of 3 multi-sig, or different types of setups in that vein. So that's a huge rabbit hole you can go down, but it's definitely good to understand the basics that if you're going to pull your coin off of an exchange, you need to know how to secure it with a device, and then also to back up that device. So let's go on to the next one.
Test with small amounts. Send a small test transaction before transferring your full balance to ensure setup correctness.
So that is mainly just hand holding. So if you have like a decent amount of Bitcoin on an exchange, it's going to be terrifying the first time that you take it off of there and take control of it, because if it's the first time you've done it, you're going to be really nervous. And so it's best to start with a small amount. So I would say, set up a wallet and just send small amounts to and from it so you get familiar with it. You can do Lightning wallets as well to get more familiar and save on fees, and then go to on-chain wallets. And so that's a great tip there from ChatGPT. So let's go on to the next one.
Confirm address accuracy. Triple check receiving addresses to avoid malware or copy-paste spoofing.
And so that's where when you send the funds from the exchange to your device, to double check the receive address. And so the device will actually show you the address on its screen, and you can verify that visually if you're using a standard hardware wallet. And then the next two are disconnecting from the internet and understanding the restoration process. So these are important. Let me read through the rest of these.
Disconnect from internet. Cold storage must be offline to be secure. Keep your wallet isolated from internet-connected devices.
So that's really important. So you can do offline, completely offline, where you're just transferring back and forth through QR codes or through a USB stick, instead of plugging the device into an internet-connected device. There's a lot of things to consider there. The main thing to do, though, is when you're writing down your recovery phrase, to keep that away from any cameras. So with phones these days having AI built into them, if you accidentally point your phone camera at your recovery phrase that you've written down, who knows if that's been saved by AI or scanned. So just be cognizant of that, and anything private, write it down, keep it away from cameras, and then keep your hardware wallet isolated and away from internet connected devices. And also think about saving the USB cable that came with your device, because you know that USB cable shouldn't be compromised, and not just using random USB cables with your hardware wallets. The next point is understand restoration process. So you should know how to restore your wallet using the seed phrase. And so when you set up your hardware wallet, what you'll want to do is send a small amount to that hardware wallet, and then wipe it, and then use your recovery phrase to see if you can get that amount back. And some wallets even have a temporary signing feature that will let you do this without having to completely wipe the original device. And so you should also do this maybe once every 6 months to a year, so that you make sure that your device is still operating and that your funds are still there. So let's say you pull out your funds and just let it sit on a hardware wallet for a couple years. As time goes by, you want to make sure that that's still intact, and that the device itself isn't compromised, or maybe some water damage hasn't occurred. And so just testing that back up is important. The next thing you want to do is securely store the device to make sure that it's not stolen or compromised due to fire or water. And so that's where having multiple backups can be useful. So say you did like a 2 of 3 multi-sig, that would have 3 different backups distributed throughout the world. And so if a disaster happens in one place, or if one of those keys gets compromised, it's not that big of a deal, because you still have the other ones to back it up. And then plan for inheritance. That's important. So in case you die unexpectedly, how can your family get those keys? And so that's where the BitKey is nice, because that's built right in as a feature to that simplified hardware wallet. You can also just take the people that you care about and show them how to recover your funds if needed. It gets trickier if the people in your life aren't very tech savvy, or they don't really understand Bitcoin or really care about it. They don't understand that it might be worth a lot one day, that kind of thing. So this can be a tricky point, but it's something that we should all be working on and working towards. So I think ChatGPT did a pretty good job with the 10 basics before you take control. I think, from my perspective, it should have done a breakout on UTXO management. And so if you don't know what a UTXO is, it's definitely important to understand that before you move your coins to cold storage. So how Bitcoin works is it's not like a bank account. You can't just send funds to your Bitcoin bank account and have it all add up in there nicely. What it is it uses a UTXO model, and so basically that just means that it's an unspent amount. So you can send yourself, like, I'm just going to work with round numbers. So let's say that you send yourself 1 Bitcoin from the exchange to your hardware wallet. Well, now that's an unspent amount in your hardware wallet, but that's 1 Bitcoin. It doesn't add it to the existing amount in your wallet. And so when you go to spend that amount in the future, it's going to cost money to spend that specific Bitcoin. And so it's not an issue if you have large amounts, but if you have small amounts, like say you're doing a small DCA and you end up with a lot of small UTXOs, when you go to spend them out of your wallet, it's going to cost money to spend each one of those unspent amounts. It's not like a cumulative thing. And so you don't want to send a ton of small UTXOs to your wallet, because those can end up being dust transaction where it costs more to spend them than it does to use the Bitcoin that you get from it. So like an analogy is, like, say you have a wallet full of $20 bills, $10 bills, $5 bills, $1 bills, and then a bunch of change. You have to break those large denomination bills to use them, and there's a fee associated with using the small amount of change. And so it's important, if you don't fully understand what UTXOs are and how they affect cold storage, learn that before you transfer. Maybe not as important if you're using like the BitKey, because as far as I understand, it simplifies a lot of that. But it still could be an issue if you're sending small amounts to your wallet. So it looks like River has a page on UTXOs that might be helpful if you're interested in learning more about this. The other thing you need to understand is about address reuse. And so how Bitcoin is set up is that you have a public and a private key, and you actually have a subset of those. And so you have like a master public key and a master private key, and your wallet can generate tons and tons of like child private and public keys. And it's best practice to never use the same one of those. And so every UTXO that you receive, so let's say that you send yourself 5 transactions from the exchange to your hardware wallet, you're going to end up with 5 UTXOs, and it's best to not use the same addresses for any of those 5. So what you would do is have your hardware wallet use the master private and public key, and then generate 5 of the child private and public keys, and use those to secure your funds. And so that way you're more private, because if someone knows one of those private keys, they can't see that you own the other 4. And so each of your withdrawals is more private in that way. It also can protect security wise. There might be a threat if you reuse the same address, especially once quantum computing comes. You're reusing the same address, and so you're giving these people more information about your private key. And the other thing is that if one of your child private keys is hacked, the other child private keys aren't hacked. Whereas if you keep all of your funds in one address, then you're using one private key, and if that private key gets hacked or compromised, you lose all your funds. And so this is one mistake that I actually made, and before I didn't fully understand it when I started taking self-custody. The other thing you need to understand is a passphrase. And so when you set up your hardware wallet, it's going to have you write down your seed words, those 12 or 24 words that you can use to back up your funds. So that way, if you lose or destroy your hardware wallet, you'll still have your seed words. The thing that your wallet is going to do is ask you if you also want to do a passphrase. And so that's kind of like a password. So if somebody found those words that you'd written down, they wouldn't be able to steal your funds using just those words. They would need those words and a passphrase. So this adds an additional amount of security, but it also complicates things because it's one more data point to remember. And so it's a trade-off there. As a general rule of thumb for myself, personally, I've forgotten passwords and I've forgotten important computer related stuff in the past, and so keeping things simple is going to be better in my case. And for a lot of people, I think keeping it simple is better, because when it comes to Bitcoin, a lot of times you're going to be your own worst self enemy. There are edge cases where someone's going to break in and steal your equipment, but it's a higher likelihood that you're going to hurt yourself when it comes to Bitcoin. Just like people always say, if you own a gun, you're more statistically to hurt yourself or someone you love on accident with it. That's kind of true when it comes to Bitcoin. You're much more likely to lose or forget some of this stuff. So keeping it simple can be good. So I know a lot of people use passphrases and love them. I'm more on the side to keep it simple, but it's a trade-off. So learn about passphrases as well. The other thing you need to take into consideration are wallet descriptors. And this is particularly important if you're using a multi-sig. So wallet descriptors let you pass your keys among different wallets and back up. So like, let's say that your hardware wallet's destroyed, all you have are your seed words. You might have trouble restoring that if you don't have these descriptors to tell your new wallet how to find and regenerate your information. Not as big of a deal if you're using a single sig wallet, but if you're using multi-sig and more advanced setups, then it's important to have this. And you should be able to export this data from the hardware wallet that you're using, and so that you can back it up in addition to your 12 words. So the video is getting long. I'll probably wrap it up there, but if I forgot to mention anything or didn't explain something well, let me know. Peace.